Welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast, where each week we speak with brands, icons, innovators, and trailblazers within the fly fishing industry, exploring both the successes and failures they've encountered along the way to become who they are today. But first, if you have not yet subscribed to the podcast or joined our email list, please do so by going to the flyfisherinsiderpodcast.com, or you can also find us on Instagram at Fly Fisher Insider Podcast. Now let's begin. Welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. Today our guest is Jonathan Farmer. Jonathan is the owner of Midnight Sun Custom Flies. Jonathan is here today to tell us more about Midnight Sun Custom Flies. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hey, good morning, Greg. Thanks for having me.
No worries. How's it going up there in Alaska?
Oh, pretty good. You know, just spring is in the air. You know, it's spring in Alaska. Everything's starting to melt finally.
Perfect. That's one of my favorite times is spring. So, definitely. You know, Jonathan, I want to jump into your background as a fly fisher before we get into your tying background, because you have such a vast experience in both. So walk us through how you got into fly fishing. Walk us through how the fly fishing led into the tying.
Oh, man. So I first learned to fly fish in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. I was on an 8-day backcountry trip, and we took fly rods, and that's where I kind of learned, was in the middle of nowhere. And that was pretty fun. And then I really had an extensive background in the gear world. I bass fished my whole life. I did some tournament bass fishing in my early to mid 20s, and then really didn't do a whole lot of fly fishing. I'd go on some trips here and there, and didn't really know what I was doing. You know, I knew how to cast a fly rod, but I didn't really know how to present flies very well. I didn't really know anything about a bug's life. And then I came up to Alaska in 2008, and I will never forget the first place that I fished, the first fly that I fished. I remember walking down to this stream and just seeing these big, giant tank rainbows just sitting in this pool, and I kept throwing the fly at them. They would not eat it. Because I was used to, you know, occasionally sight fishing for largemouth and things like that, and didn't realize that these fish were just not interested at all. So Alaska really started to hone my skills in the fly fishing arena, and you know, we're kind of spoiled up here. My home fishery, it's estimated that we have 8,000 roughly fish per river mile. So you get to learn very quickly by a lot of trial and error. If you're doing something wrong, then you're clearly doing something wrong. If you're doing something right, then you're going to catch a lot of fish. So that's kind of, you know, that's been the progression for me in fly fishing is really starting off in Alaska, still not knowing what I was doing. And then if you surround yourself with anglers that have experience and know what they're doing, you're going to learn very quickly, right? So, and then just experimenting from there was kind of the progression in fly fishing for me.
Cool. So then how did that translate into like the progression when you talk about that progression and you're in Alaska? Did that translate into like, hey, it's a long winter, so I'm going to tie flies? Or did you always have an interest in tying flies at that point? Walk us through that.
So the fly tying thing, I mean, that's a whole, like, that could be a whole entire hour-long conversation in and of itself, but I'll keep it short and sweet. I was going through some fairly rough stuff in my life, kind of, you know, down, And I spent like a whole summer just fishing. That's all I did. Is I just spent a whole entire summer just fishing. And when you do that, you're clearly not going to have a whole lot of money to walk into fly shops and buy flies. And so I thought, a buddy of mine had a vise, and I started tying some flies, and we were fishing a lot of dries at the time, and I was sick of going into the fly shop and buying dry flies and having them maybe last 6, 8 fish maybe, and so I was like, I'm going to save myself some money and start tying my own flies. Well, that, as any fly tyer knows, is not the case. So really, I got into it and I started tying dries, and I'm really glad that I did, because when you start tying small stuff, and for us, small here in Alaska is a size 14, typically a 12 for dries. But when you start with those smaller flies, it really teaches you discipline. And if you're not disciplined at the vise, then you're going to have a hard time. So really what started off was to just kind of like be a good way to channel my energy turned into an obsession, and then eventually a business for me. Started tying dries and then moved into trout streamers, and then started really gaining an interest for swinging flies for steelhead, because I've got a couple of phenomenal steelhead fisheries here on the peninsula where I live. And it's just been we've got Chinook and coho, and I mean, you've been up here, you've fished some of our coho fisheries. It's incredible.
Yeah, no. It's funny, Jonathan. Like, you're talking about it, and I'm like remembering it, and I'm just like, oh my god, yeah, I remember that. And having used your flies as well, I know. Like, I remember when you gave me a ton of flies there, like the size of them. Like, I was thinking when you said, oh, like the dries and this and that, and the size, I'm like, yeah, the flies I got were pretty monstrous. They're pretty big for those big fish. So, yeah, definitely can relate to everything you're saying, and I'm having that moment of thinking back about it, especially with those coho and the rainbows and whatnot. So really, really cool.
And it's funny because our coho. Go ahead.
No, it's just great fishery, like you said. Like, it's insane.
It's funny. Our coho, you don't have to throw giant flies for our coho, especially like midday on a bright day.
Mm-hmm.
They're not gonna. A lot of the time, they're not going to take a giant fly. I think it was the Avenger that you were fishing for coho. You sent me a picture of, and it was just the brass eyes were beat up, and it was been chewed on quite a bit. Well, and that's not a big fly.
Yeah, that fly caught a lot of fish, though. We did that fly out, right, with All Alaska, and I mean, we went out to, like, I don't know, it's like fish after fish, right? It was a good trip. And I mean, yeah, like some monstrous stuff. So that's your backyard, and that's your fishery for those people, for many people that don't know. And I mean, what is it? It's the Kenai River, as well as, because I remember I met you at some little town. I met you like me and Rock Treads were like, hey,
Cooper Landing.
Is that
Cooper Landing. And
what is it? We phoned you when we were driving. I remember to pick up the flies, and you're like, hey, meet me at this like store, and we're like middle of nowhere. Two guys, like, ask him like, how cool is this? We're like waiting for this dude to drop off like custom flies that are specific for that area. Up in this town, and there's this store, and I walked in this store, and I'm like, wow, it's just really cool. Just a fun experience. Yeah. It was really cool. So.
Yeah, the Upper Kenai is my home water, and it's a beautiful, beautiful stretch of water that's, I don't know, give or take about roughly 21, 22 miles from Kenai Lake to Ski Lac Lake, and I fish a section. I fish like a 7-mile stretch of water for the most part in the wintertime. That really opens up because you can walk in a whole lot of other places. And but it's a pretty amazing piece of water that we have.
Yeah, I found when I was there, it's quite high. I don't know if it was just that time or if it blown out or whatnot. Well, I knew one day it blew out, but I found it was quite high. Where we went into was it one of the parks or where the boat launch was, and
I mean,
yeah,
it's not uncommon. The average flows for us in the summer are 6 to 7,000 CFS. I've seen summers at 10,000 all summer long.
hmm
I saw Bikini a couple of winters ago. We were in October, November, and we were still at 10,000, 9,000 CFS. So it's interesting how dynamic that river can be, but it also can absorb a lot of water. So it can just rain and rain and rain and rain and rain, and it can absorb a whole lot. It doesn't blow out like a lot of coastal streams will.
yeah, like
So
ours.
that's kind of a benefit that it'll still fish at pretty high levels.
Yeah, our rivers down here in BC, they blow out. When they blow. That's for sure. I'll give you that. So, I want to shift back to the flies here, and what I want to do is
Yeah.
I want to talk about how, and I think it's important to mention that you're not just like some dude, sitting at home tying flies, for yourself. I mean, you're selling these flies, but you're also, you have an involvement with OSPT, right? Talk about the involvement. Talk about your tying with them. Talk about everything because you've created some flies. You're known for creating flies and specific patterns that are, you're notorious for. Which I want to get into all that sort of stuff. So let's talk about how you got involved with OSPT.
So when I first started tying for OPST, and for those folks that aren't familiar, it's Olympic Peninsula Skagit Tactics. Um, when I first started with them, it was interesting how that all happened. So I had left a job of ski patrolling at Alyeska Resort in Girdwood, and I wasn't going to come back. And I was like, "What am I going to do for a living?" And I was like, "I don't know." And I've always been, kind of an entrepreneur. Of this is my third, fourth business now, and so I started tying flies for a local fly shop in Anchorage, and it's Mossy's Fly Shop, and I was talking to Mike, and he's like, "Yeah, you can put some stuff in the shop." So I started off in consignment in the shop, and one of the guys that was working for OPST at the time was up in Anchorage and bought some of my stuff and took it back down there. And then they got a hold of me, and we started having this conversation of like, "Hey, so we noticed that you commercially tie. We really like your stuff. Would you have any interest in doing some commercial tying for us?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd have some interest." And we started talking about like what volume I could produce, and they'd had a couple of false starts, and so we started to work things out, and then they're like, "All right, let's do it." And for 3-4 years, I was working 70 to 80 hours a week, nearly every single week, just tying.
Wow,
Tying. Yeah, it was pretty brutal.
that's above full time work. Wow.
Yeah, I mean it was brutal. I'd have people joking with me about losing my eyesight, and
But,
how's your hands doing? How's your back
yeah.
doing? And
Did you enjoy
you keep
it?
a foam roller around. I love it. So that's the thing. When you can sit down and tie flies for yourself at the end of a week like that, or at the end of a day, then and it not be a tasking chore for like a lot of people would lose their mind. But I enjoy working from home. I haven't set an alarm really in like, I don't know, 5 years. I just kind of, there's been a lot of nights where I've been up working until 2 a.m. and you just kind of, I don't know, you just get up and work and go to sleep and work. And I like being responsible for, my own income, or really, and it's not about money. It's about the process of owning your own business and it's like a big puzzle. It's like problem solving. It's the same when you're designing flies. The first one is always garbage. The first half dozen are always garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep some of them around, but it's solving a problem, right? It's working through the puzzle and figuring out how this is going to work and trying to stay ahead of seasons. And there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just tying flies. I do all my own advertising, marketing, photography, designing, tying, and then I started to bring on a couple of guys from the lower 48. I've got an amazing crew of guys, Joe Rudder and Jordan Ray and Jim Sins, all out of Washington and Oregon, and they've been a huge help. They've taken a lot of load off of my back for I guess about a year now, and so that's been really, really helpful. But it's really the problem solving.
Are they producing the same quality as that you turn out, or are they producing better, or are they producing the same?
Oh man,
yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. So everybody has strengths and weaknesses, in life and in tying, and really figuring out who has what strength and who has what weakness, and I certainly have them. There are things that a couple of these guys do that I can't touch. It's just fantastic. I'm not a muddler tire. I'm not a classic,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not known for classic stuff. But a couple of them have greater strengths in certain areas. And so it's really cool. We all feed off of each other, but I've learned what they do best. And so now, knowing what they do best individually, I can send them those things, and I know that they're going to be as good as anything that I'm going to put out. I've actually taken some of their flies and taken one of mine and thrown it in the mix. And a good friend of mine who knows my work incredibly well, I'll ask him, say which one's mine. And they'll sort through them, and they'll try and be really nitpicky, and they'll be like, I don't know this one. And I'm like, nope, that was Jim's.
Well, that's good.
So at that point in time, it's really cool that, and I've fished some of their stuff, and I know how durable it is. I preach redundancy and crazy glue, and we build these things to be as absolutely bulletproof durable as you can make any natural material.
I agree. Your flies are 100% durable, and let's talk about that. Like when you're creating flies and you're looking at the durability aspect, are you thinking about specific materials, or are you going for quality? Like, obviously you go for quality, but I mean, like, are you going for the highest quality, or like walk me through what makes your flies so superior and hold up to big fish that in the rocks and that Pacific Northwest, like BC, Alaska waters, which are full of rock, full of what I mean, like they're rough waters.
Yeah, and they're cold water as well.
Yeah.
Cold water can really put a hurt on a lot of materials. When I design a fly, typically what I do is I take a couple of materials that I really want to work with, and a platform that I kind of have in my head. Usually it starts with the platform and then start choosing materials. But we all have our favorite materials, and really, so once you have that idea and you start having these materials in mind that you want to use, I mean, certainly you have some, like, let's take fin raccoon, for example, is a great winter. It's a great winter material for the Pacific Northwest and Alaska because it won't break like, I've heard some people complain about marabou breaking in really cold weather. I mean, I've fished water that was so cold that the hook was literally freezing every couple of casts. And I haven't had that experience with marabou too much, a little bit here and there, but fin raccoon moves really well. It's all about where some of these materials come from, but that's a whole nother topic in and of itself. So when designing a fly, you kind of have a platform in mind, then you start picking materials, and then it's really based on how it's constructed and the things that you can do, like doubling back the tip of a feather when you tie it in, and just not, being lazy. And then crazy glue is another thing that really helps. If we do a tinsel body, it's got crazy glue underneath, so it really locks that down. And there's just some techniques, and you'll see them in some of the YouTube videos of mine on the OPST YouTube channel, and some stuff that I share on Instagram Live, and some things we really go through. Again, I preach redundancy when tying off a dubbing loop and doubling back on it, and just making sure that things aren't going to come unraveled. That's really a big thing for me. So, yeah.
Cool. Jonathan, what are some of the patterns that you've created that you're known
Oh,
for,
man.
that you're specifically known for yourself?
Oh, the graboid for sure. The graboid and the mini-me graboid.
That's where I was going to go with it.
There's a really, yeah, there's funny story about that fly. I had this prototype in mind, and I was floating the Upper Kenai, and I saw one of my best friends on a gravel bar, and we stopped over, and I pulled out my box, and I'm like, "Here, man, you gotta try a couple of these fish, a couple of these. Tell me how they cast, tell me how they fish, blah blah blah." And he looks at it and he goes, "What are you calling it?" And I was like, "I don't know." And he goes, "You'd be sorry you don't give it a name. Graboids. That's what I like." And he kept saying it over and over and over and over again. I just thought it was the funniest thing, and I just kept laughing. And this went on for months and months. And that I just felt it appropriate to end up calling that fly what it is. But the graboid's one of them. The lead zephron's another. Yeah. The beast of burden.
I'm sensing a trend here.
Oh man.
I'm sensing a classic rock trend. Now let me ask you, do you listen to classic rock when you're tying flies?
It's funny, a lot of the time I don't even listen to music. I did for a while. I'll either sit and work in silence, which is pretty common, mm-hmm. or I listen to, I binge listen to TV shows. Because when you work from home by yourself, music gets old, but just having some background noise. So, mm-hmm. But I do, the era in which I grew up in, it was like, I listened to a lot of classic rock. So yeah, that kind of influences some of the names, and, it's just, naming flies is hard. It really is. That might be the hardest part for me, is choosing a name. And with the lead zephron, it kind of made sense because it's kind of blimpy in shape, and mm-hmm. It's real prawny, and it just has that same kind of overall shape as a zephron or a blimp. And then it's got brass, and it doesn't actually have any lead in it, but one of my favorite bands is Led Zeppelin, so it made sense.
Mm-hmm. I like it.
The beast of burden also made sense because it's a steelhead fly, and this is a species that a lot of us will put in a lot of time and a lot of really gnarly weather, and really difficult water conditions and places that aren't really typically enjoyable to cast in, although I like these difficult spots for some reason. It forces creativity. But that makes sense. That made sense to me as well. But yeah, the graboid, the zephron, there's a whole slew of them. I think at this point now there's 16 or 17 patterns that I have out there.
Those are honestly your top three, and I would agree with that for sure.
Probably
100%. You sell thousands of them a year. I get it. So. You mentioned. You mentioned something in our little dialogue there about YouTube videos and working on the the web videos and webinars and stuff like that. Now, do you still currently do a tying class, or walk us through that? You were offering some kind of tying program or one-on-one or something like that. I can't remember all the details.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I started, this winter. As an entrepreneur, you try and do things that you don't notice anybody else doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the process. It's part of the problem solving situation of being an entrepreneur. And I was like, man, what is nobody else doing? And I was like, how can I live kind of remote. I mean, I'm on the road system, but I live in a town of like 450 people in the winter. But I was trying to figure out how I could help people and provide them value through fly tying lessons or instruction. And so there's a couple entrepreneurs that I listen to, and from some of the things I've listened to, it kind of spawned this idea. And so I started doing the Friday night live thing, which we do typically it's either 7 or 8 o'clock, whichever works for me and my crew on Friday nights on Instagram. And then I had this idea to do one-on-one live video chats. And so I did a small group, and just trying to decide what platform worked best, whether it be FaceTime or whether it be Instagram video chat or Facebook or Zoom or Google chat or whatever it was. And after that small test group, I asked everybody kind of what they got out of it and if they felt like they got value out of it. And then I decided that this was something that I was going to start doing. And so I offer like an hour session, and 2-hour sessions. And from what, the feedback that I've gotten is that, it's really helped a lot of people. So I'm excited to see the progression of the folks that have done this with me. It's really neat. And I love seeing photos. People send me photos on Instagram all the time, and it's really neat to watch the progression of other folks. And it's also really cool to connect with people. It's sometimes it's kind of weird because they're paying me for my time, but still you inevitably end up developing some type of relationship, especially when you get to do a one-on-one a live video chat instead of it being,
of course you do,
like a recorded, thing on the internet. It's live. Like I sit down, we pick a time, whatever works with them. I'm pretty flexible, and it's really cool. It's been pretty fun, and it's just about providing people as much value as we can. And then I send them the flies that I tie. And I've had a couple of people just want to sit there and take notes on their computer or write them down. I've had a couple of folks want to tie along with me. I've had a couple of people that are auditory learners, so they just watch and listen. And it's been a really fun experience. On top of what I generally do, it's also a nice break,
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I like where you're going with it, and I think you're doing well with that, and it is the way of the future, and particularly right now in these times as well that we're currently in with this COVID stuff. So, a
lot of people are stuck at home, and it's. I mean, stuck at home. I mean, and that's kind of a weird thing to say. Nobody's at this point. Nobody's forcing us to be in our houses, at least not in my state. But it is different. There is a different sense, especially now. So, being able to do that when we can't, I can't have a whole bunch of people over to my house and just do a round table kind of situation, which would be super fun. But yeah.
Well, let me ask you then. We can jump right into this then. How is this affecting a small business like yourself?
This is a topic that I've tried not to give a whole lot of thought to, because but it's inevitable as an entrepreneur and as someone who works for themselves and doesn't draw a paycheck from anyone. It's pretty scary. I've seen I've seen about a 90 to 95% drop in overall revenue.
Wow, those are staggering.
You know, yeah, it's scary. In wintertime is a pretty big time for me, but summer is unmatchable, right? Like, I mean, winter's huge for me because I do so much stuff for winter steelhead and throughout Oregon and Washington, and fall really for guys going to BC and Alaska. But summer, it's huge. And I work with several fly shops here in Alaska, Mossy's, in Anchorage, trout fitters in Cooper Landing. Then I do a lot of stuff for local folks here. And then I also work with a string of fly shops in the Pacific Northwest, Washington and Oregon, Caddis Fly, Waters West. We're hoping to bring on some more fly shops as we build a catalog, because that's something that is really important to me, is getting a really good catalog out there. And things have happened really fast over the last year. I went from just by myself to now having, 3 guys. We did have 4. We had one that wanted to really focus on basically becoming a philanthropist and volunteering as much of his time as he possibly could, and helping as many people as possible, which I think is great. Unbelievably admirable. But yeah, so fly shops right now are kind of on a they're not wanting to spend a whole lot of money because they're really uncertain, and I still have some stuff trickling in, but pretty much everybody, OPST, all these fly shops that I work with, all these folks they're hurting too. They don't have any walk-in customers. They're doing all of their stuff online. And so when you lose tourism in Alaska, like we have, I'm really happy the state is doing what they're doing. If you fly into Alaska right now, it's a 2-week mandatory quarantine. And if you violate that 2-week mandatory quarantine, whether you're a resident or not, it's a $25,000 fine and up to a year in jail. So I'm really happy that Alaska is doing that, just to protect Alaskan residents, because we have so many communities that are very small that don't have a hospital, that you're hours away. Like, the closest hospital to me is an hour away. The closest clinic to me is an hour away. So I applaud those efforts. But yeah, as a whole, I've seen 90 to 95% drop, because a lot of my early spring and early summer clients are people that are going to come up here and go fish out west for Chinook or, rainbows. And with some of the state mandates, people haven't even been sure if they can go fish or not. So there's actually an EO put out yesterday, for those of you who don't know, an emergency order that said you can still go fishing. Just don't stop anywhere. Go fishing and then go home.
Hey, that's better than nothing, right? There's some states.
Absolutely.
From my understanding, what I've heard, I mean, I'm not in your country, but from my research and what I've seen in the news and whatnot, is what I believe you have one or two states that are completely shut down from fishing. So I mean,
Washington State, where Joe and Jordan live. Joe's on the Olympic Peninsula, which is awesome to have him as a resource, because he grew up on the OP.
It's a huge resource.
Yeah, man, that guy he's a great angler. To have him there, and then Jordan is more central Washington, so they fish different fisheries. Both incredible anglers. Neither one of them can go fishing at all, period. And then you've got Jim in Oregon, who can still go fishing, but they're still having to practice, social distancing and but at least he can still go fish. I can still go fish. Our weather's just been hit or miss because it's spring in Alaska. It can be 15 degrees in the morning and not really get up above 30, or it can stay above freezing and be 45 all day. And so it's really hit or miss. So you have to kind of pick and choose the days that you're willing to tolerate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But
well,
we'll get through it.
Yeah,
at least I've got a stockpile of material.
We will get through it. And this is what I was going to ask you is like, so what are the lodges? What are the guides? Like, what's the vibe up in Alaska from the COVID? Like, I mean, I hear about the vibe down in the south and whatnot. But what's going on up there? Because I mean, your season doesn't really start till much later and everyone's living in the now. But what is the vibe up there?
Right. So, from everything that I can gather, and and this is just from our local crews and people that I know. I know a guy who owns a lodge out on the Alagnac. I know some guides that come up here and guide. There's a guy in Georgia. His name's Dry Fly John on Instagram. A phenomenal human being. Super nice guy. There's a potential for nobody to really come up until at least August. Lodges are probably going to hurt. I would imagine that you see several of them be non-existent after this year, just on a business standpoint, because there aren't a whole lot of people that can afford to just absorb a year. I mean, that's really a year and a half if you look at it, because they closed in October of 2019, and if they miss this whole entire season, that's a year and a half being shut down essentially. So I hope that they make it through it. There's also a lot of Alaska Native villages that are not allowing outsiders in. So even getting to some of these places is going to be a logistical nightmare. I don't know how you get around that unless you can take a float plane straight to your lodge and then fly all of your guests from Anchorage directly to your lodge, which most people stop in Bethel or Antioch or King Salmon or Dillingham or any of these places. They're not allowing people in. I mean, they've even talked about shutting down the Bristol Bay commercial fishery for the year. Wow. Dillingham has threatened the state. If they don't do it, they will, and they just won't let anyone in. So there's a sense of panic. There's a sense of uncertainty, and I hope that we don't lose our whole entire season. On a public health stance, I want what's best for everyone, but at the same time, shutting down the economy isn't helping anything either. So I don't know. It's a double-edged sword, really, Greg.
100% agree with you on that. So I'm going to chime in on that because I do agree with you. It is 100% double-edged sword. And we all want what's best for humanity, for sure. So I mean, there's sacrifices all around. I just feel for the people that have put in the hard work and built up their businesses, and unfortunately, there is going to be people. There is going to be casualties out there, and when I say casualties, business casualties out there. Businesses are going to not survive this, unfortunately, and it's unfortunate. And I don't know what we could do. I mean, who knows who's going to survive this or not, and how long it's going to go. And it's hard, right? So, I mean, yeah.
Luckily for me, and this is just what I keep telling myself, is that I've got a stockpile material, right? I can always get back into this business with, in relation to businesses, a minimal investment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether be $1,000 or $2,000, you get right back into it, right?
Yep.
You can kind of pick up where you left off, assuming that everything goes back to air quote normal. But it's definitely concerning. I haven't really exactly figured it out. I've been trying to talk with my crew, and and figure out some plans and some ideas. But it's given me time to work on some other projects. I do know that. Some things that I've wanted to do for a while that I feel like right now is the time for. And so we've got a couple of things in the works.
Anything you can share with us?
And,
just to lighten the mood?
Things where there's talk of potential for a website. I'm definitely building a really strong catalog to be able to send out to shops, summer, fall, winter, spring. I mean, everything from sea run cutthroat to Chinook, steelhead trout. With my bass background, we're talking about stuff like that, but it's not my strong suit in tying, right? There's a lot of guys out there that are incredible bass tyers, right? So really, like, sticking to your strong suits is important, and then dabbling in some stuff that you have some interest in is fun, but it's not gonna, I'm not gonna walk into the bass arena and be like, these things are not, it's not gonna happen, right? So certainly not with that attitude. But I've started doing some writing. I will share with you some of that. I've started doing some writing, which I'm pretty excited about. But yeah, really just cataloging a lot of this stuff, and it's a lot of photography, and it's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort. This stuff just, it takes time, and we have time now, so that's kind of cool. So you look at the silver linings.
You have to, right? You definitely have to.
Yeah.
And these are all projects to redirect and refocus, which is good, right? It expands your brand, expands who you guys are, and is putting more stuff out there for the general public and that support.
I mean, that goes for anything in life, though. Not to get real philosophical, but if you focus on the negative of the now, then you fail to see the potential for tomorrow. Right. And that's something that I'm constantly having to remind myself of is this too shall pass, and not allowing yourself to freak out and worry, and because life will go on tomorrow. Might I miss a meal? Probably here and there, but this too shall pass. So, focusing on things that you can do and really taking, an unfortunate situation to turn something positive from it and be productive still, even though you may not have, orders sitting on your bench, or you may not have a whole lot of stuff coming in. Which is scary, still taking that time to be productive still and engage with your audience and still try and keep a positive outlook, I think, is really important.
I was going to ask you if you had any last words, but I think you kind of summed it up right there with that. and I guess we should just leave it on a high note like that. So, Jonathan, I want to help you, and I know and I'm going to throw this out there, is I know we fully endorse, myself, the Fly Fishing Insider podcast, our crew, our team, the people that I was in Alaska with that used your flies, fully endorse the product as well. If someone wanted to reach out to you, check out your flies, get a hold of you, ask you questions, get involved with everything that you're doing, all that fun sort of stuff, where would they do that?
Yeah, so I've got a whole bunch of I've got 4 social media accounts, my personal ones and then my business ones. But the Midnight Sun Custom Flies Instagram page is the best avenue to get a hold of me.
We'll just leave it at that.
And and so for custom orders up until now, for always, and even including the present, those go through my DMs. So if anybody's interested in placing a custom order, we work those things out on an individual basis, right? Where you're going, what you want, all of that kind of stuff. But I love getting questions. I try and answer every single DM, every single question. So yeah, the Instagram Midnight Sun Custom Flies is without a doubt the best avenue. And then there's a couple of contact buttons on there where people can call me or email me. But the DM or Instagram is without a doubt the best.
Totally agree. I'm going to make sure I put all that in the show notes as well. And you also have that, what is it, the Garboid box? You guys, I'm telling you, any fly fishers out there, you need this in your collection of flies. It's something you're definitely going to want. That's for sure. I know.
Yeah. I mean, we focus mainly on swing flies, trout spay, a micro scadget, whatever you want to call it, and then steelhead, any anadromous species. That's where our focus is. So for those folks, but at the same time, we do things that translate into single hand, traditional fly lines and things like that as well. So, but the graboids, those are a big producer. They've caught a lot of fish all over the world, which is really neat to live vicariously through other people.
Oh, for sure. No, I agree. You know what, Jonathan? Yeah. Stay safe up there, buddy. I want to thank you for everything. Thanks for sharing your story with us and giving us an update as well as what's going on up in Alaska. And listeners, I want to thank you guys as well. I'm going to make sure I put all the details of everything Jonathan and I talked about today in our show notes. So, all right. Thanks, everyone.
Absolute pleasure.
You've been listening to the Fly Fishing Insider podcast. If you like this podcast episode, please let us know. Leave a review and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast listening platform.